This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Good morning, Mr. Johnston. Thank you for your attendance today. Through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Johnston, in 2010, Justin Trudeau, as a private citizen before entering into politics, told CBC Radio that you were a great dinner companion. He specifically said, quote, "We had great conversations around dinner tables, around all sorts of things." This was said around the same time that you were being appointed as our Governor General. Were you aware of that statement, sir?
Madam Chair, I was not aware of that statement. In connection with Mr. Trudeau, my meeting with him occurred when he was 10 or 11 years old, skiing with my children 4 or 5 times.
Thank you, Mr. Johnston. We'll get into those areas. My time is very limited, sir. Sir, I got another question for you. As Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau described you as a lifelong family friend, a friendship cemented over many summers as neighboring cottagers in the Laurentians. You never corrected the Prime Minister in his characterization of your relationship with him. Isn't that correct?
Madam Chair, the connection I had with Mr. Trudeau...
Mr. Johnston, I apologize for interrupting you, but the question is, did you...
I'm going to pause. I didn't think it'd be this early into the meeting, Mr. PROC. You and I have had an exchange before, so you know very well that comments are through the chair. I can assure you that the Prime Minister and I have not gone to the cottage together. And so I would just say that if we can just pause and take a second, that's why I wanted to provide a little bit more time. I will provide leniency to ensure that we get to where you need to get to.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the question to Mr. Johnston was, did you characterize or did you change that statement that Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister made to you about you being a lifelong family friend cemented over many summers as neighboring cottagers in the Laurentians? Did you confirm or deny that, sir?
Madam Chair, I was not familiar with the statement that has just been made. I was friends of the father of Mr. Trudeau through his life in politics, and when we tried to engage him with the University of Montreal to be a professor on his return. My last particular meeting with the current Prime Minister...
Thank you, Mr. Johnston. I'm going to be getting into areas where you can expand upon things that you've done with the Prime Minister. I need to move on. My time is limited. In 2016, 6 years into your role as Governor General, you gave an interview to the CTV. You were asked about your views of having the Trudeau family living on the grounds of Rideau Hall. Without pause or hesitation, you said it was wonderful because their children played with your grandchildren in the garden. That was pretty exciting to have the next generation together, bringing the place alive. That statement was accurate, correct?
Madam Chair, I don't remember that particular statement, but it is true that the Trudeau family lived in
Thank you, Mr. Johnston. You further stated in the same interview that the Trudeaus were very good tenants.
Point of order, Mr. Turnbull.
You've seen now repeated Mr. Brock cutting off the witness when he's not being given the chance to respond. I would appreciate it if at least we could just let Mr. Johnston respond to the question he's being asked. I think that's decorum and normal practice.
Madam Chair, if I may respond, my time is very limited. The question was centered on as to whether or not the statement was accurate. It did not require the witness to elaborate.
I'm just going to respond really quickly, and I feel that PROC has high ratings. We've been here for a long time. I think you know how I operate as chair now as well. And I do believe these points of orders and me interrupting, which I don't want to do, actually just takes away from the time that we're talking about being so precious. Allowing the witness to finish a sentence, I do not think would take too much time, and I think it's appropriate just to let the witness answer. Mr. Brock, I agree the time is yours, but let's just be mindful, and I think we can get through this. And I know you can, Mr. Brock, so I'm going to pass you back the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You further stated that your wife Sharon and yourself became good friends with the Trudeaus, that your relationship with Pierre Trudeau went back to children's days when the families would get together to ski at Mount Tremblant. You stated that the 3 Trudeau boys were the same age as your 5 daughters, that you became a ski party at Mont Tremblant. You stated that your children had enormous respect for Pierre Elliott Trudeau. He was a wonderful father and very good with the children, who at this point were teenagers, that he would lead them into discussions such as democracies in the world. And then in 2017, sir, you interviewed with Paul Wells. You talked of knowing Justin Trudeau since he was 6 years old, as both families shared adjacent cottages in the Laurentians. In 2017, sir, the Prime Minister paid tribute to you, calling you a family friend and a friend of his father. He ended his comments by saying to both of you and your wife, "Thank you, my friends." You privately or publicly did not object to the assessment of your friendship with Justin Trudeau. Now let's fast forward to your press conference of May the 23rd. You were on record stating the following basic facts of your so-called friendship with Justin Trudeau. Your words, sir, that when your children were ages 7 to 12, you had a condo at the foot of Mount Tremblant. Pierre Elliott Trudeau had a country home 50 kilometers away. On 5 occasions over 7 years, he and his 3 kids came and parked their car in the lot. On one occasion, you drove the kids back to their mother's house. You knew Justin Trudeau as a student at McGill. You had no contact with Justin Trudeau until he was an elected MP and later as Prime Minister. The point is, for 40 years, you said, sir, I had no contact with JT, Justin Trudeau, not as a friend. Those are the facts. Later that day, you interviewed with CTV anchor Omar Sakajina and stated your relationship with Justin Trudeau was an unfortunate allegation. You largely confirmed the same details as your press conference, but changed the frequency of ski trips to 5 occasions over 2 to 3 years as opposed to over 7 years. Now, Mr. Johnston, what we have before this committee are 2 completely different descriptions of your relationship with Justin Trudeau. Those 2 different descriptions cannot be accurate at the same time. So my question is simple and direct, Mr. Johnston. Were you telling Canadians the truth on May the 23rd or back in 2016?
Madam Chair, telling the truth with connection with my relationship with Prime Minister Trudeau goes back to when our children were teenagers, and during the course of almost 40 years, we had no meetings, no dinners at one another's homes, no particular contact. Was a friend of the father, etc., but those were the extent of the contacts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll resume the time there. Sir, you were a member of the Trudeau Foundation until your appointment to this position. Is that correct?
I was a member, Madam Chair, I was a member of the Trudeau Foundation, member of the association, which is like shareholders in general meeting of the Trudeau Foundation, not a member of the board of directors. I joined it in 2018, just a year or so after I'd stepped down as Governor General, because I've had a very long concern and interest in student support, graduate student scholarships. And the role as a member of the association is to attend annual general meetings, vote in the board of directors.
Thank you, sir.
I have had nothing to do whatsoever with any of the decision-making of the Trudeau Foundation.
Were you aware of the reporting that the Trudeau Foundation was targeted for a foreign influence campaign by Beijing and that the foundation accepted $140,000 from the communist dictatorship in Beijing?
Madam Chair, the first knowledge I had of that particular gift was when it appeared in the newspaper, and as a member of the association, I received a memo from the CEO, like I think other members of the association, that
Thank you, sir.
Had started a press release indicating that gift was being returned.
Thank you for confirming your knowledge of it. Given your ties to the foundation's involvement with Beijing, and Beijing's role in your report, do you see a conflict of interest?
Madam Chair, my connection with the association of the Trudeau Foundation had no role whatsoever with the decision-making of the board of directors, the acceptance of gifts, and so on.
Thank you, sir. You've been friends with Frank Iacobucci for decades, is that correct?
Madam Chair, Professor Iacobucci and I were young law professors at the University of Toronto, I think when I was about 25, and yes, he's been a lifelong friend.
And Mr. Iacobucci, also a member of the Trudeau Foundation, is who you sought out an opinion from on the matter of whether or not you were in a conflict of interest, for which he provided you the exemption or excuse that you were looking for.
Madam Chair, Professor Iacobucci, Justice Iacobucci, was not a member of the Trudeau Foundation. He was a mentor to one or two students who were scholars of the foundation. The function of the foundation is not only to provide scholarships, but to provide the possibility of mentorship for those students by people who are respected in their area.
Well, thank you,
and
sir.
he served in that capacity, and yes, when allegations were made about me having a conflict of interest,
thank you, sir.
He knows me for a long time, and he indicated I had none.
Sir, I believe there's at least 12 retired Supreme Court justices who aren't associated with the Trudeau Foundation, like Mr. Iacobucci. Mr. Iacobucci's law firm, Torrey's LLP, was also hired. You hired them to assist you, and working for Torrey's was a long-time Liberal donor, Sheila Block. So we have you with an association to the Trudeau Foundation. We have Mr. Iacobucci, who is associated with the Trudeau Foundation. We have Ms. Block, who is a lifetime donor and supporter of the Liberal Party, including attending fundraising events with the Prime Minister in recent time. Given all of that, you don't see a conflict of interest?
Madam Chair, with respect to the question of Ms. Block, she is a preeminent counsel.
The question is with respect to conflict of interest, sir.
Okay, pause. So you just took 23 seconds to ask that? Let's just provide the witness 23 seconds to answer that. And now I can't believe that I'm sitting here timing how much time it's taking for the questions so the answer so that I can run a functional meeting. When members have all asked for 3 hours of time of this person. 3 hours, that's a long time to be meeting. And then we talk about how important our time is, but then you want me to keep interrupting. So, Mr. Johnston, the floor is yours.
Madam Chair, I do not see a conflict. Sheila Block is a preeminent counsel. She served me very faithfully when I was invited by Prime Minister Harper to undertake another very difficult inquiry 15 years or so ago. She is renowned for the quality of her work, and it's certainly important work that's done well. But that said, the conclusions in the report are mine. Whatever lawyers in practice or others do with respect to contributions to political campaigns, these are all on public record and well understood.
Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Johnston. Mr. Johnston, I was quite shocked in your opening comments when you said the comments on your integrity are false, and the fact that we repeat them doesn't make them true. I think that this statement alone puts you in a situation of a conflict of interest, in particular towards the leaders of the opposition. Mr. Johnston, you were Governor-General of Canada, so you could not exercise any political role, but you still have a pay as former Governor-General, is that correct?
Could you repeat the question, Madam Chair? Have what as a pay?
Do you continue to receive pay as former Governor-General? You still receive payment?
Madam Chair, I don't receive any payment as former Governor-General. I have a pension as a public servant, and that is the pay. And there's...
Merci.
Thank you. You were a member of the Trudeau Foundation for how many years?
Madam Chair, thank you for that question. I joined the association of the Trudeau Foundation. That's like a shareholder at a general meeting, not a member of the board of directors, not involved in any decision making.
That's not the question.
To vote in the board to approve the financial statements, no involvement in fundraising of that kind. And I resigned, that was 2018, and I resigned in March of this year when I was appointed to this role.
You have declared in an interview in 2016 talking about relationship with the family of the Prime Minister that you got to know the children, and our friendship was built on exchanges amongst children. Do you remember these statements?
Madam Chair, I do recall referring to the fact that my own children and Mr. Trudeau, as a young boy, did have opportunities to ski together 4 or 5 times. Between that time and until he became Prime Minister, I had no meetings with Mr. Trudeau, and our children, to my knowledge, did not. And when they became neighbors to us at Rideau Hall, I think I referred to it, the fact that it would be very nice for our grandchildren to have a chance to play with his children. And that didn't occur, I don't think, on any occasions, but it still would have been a pleasant experience for us.
Monsieur Johnston.
Mr. Johnston, I'd like to ask you to be briefer in your answers because I'm trying to go through several points and I want to be respectful and give you time to respond, but I've got very precise questions. When you were the president of University of Waterloo, you went to Chongqing and you met President Xi Jinping and you said it's wonderful to be back in China. It feels as if I've gone back home. Is that exact?
Madam Chair, if I understand the question correctly, it was wonderful to be back home. I think that was Mr. Trudeau going back to 24 Sussex Drive, and that was not available. The Secretary to the Office of Governor General very gallantly said he would be happy to vacate Rideau Cottage, and that's why Mr. Trudeau's family moved in there.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, perhaps there are problems in terms of interpretation because the answers are not matching up with the questions that I've been putting from the outset. So I'd like to ask you to show some indulgence. I'll try and talk slowly. It seems that Mr. Johnston has not answered my questions due to the interpretation. Mr. Johnston, you asked Mr. Jacobi, a former mentor of the Trudeau Foundation, to give his opinion on possible conflict of interest when you were becoming the Special Rapporteur. Is that correct that you turned to him? And you turn to Ms. Sheila Block, who is a big supporter of the Liberal Party, to be your main advisor in drafting the report. Is that true?
Madam Chair, it is true that Madam Block was my senior counsel with respect
Thank you.
to inquiry, and I reached out to her to be the senior counsel for this review as well.
I have lots of other statements that you have defined as false, Mr. Johnston, but unfortunately I don't have much time because of problems of interpretation. You have written a book called Trust. I've got it here. There's no version in French, and in this book, and I'd like to cite from it, Madam Chair, that the worst leaders manipulate by not disclosing information or only disclose information that supports their opinions and decisions and actions. Do you remember writing that?
I do remember writing that chapter of this book, yes.
Monsieur Johnston.
Mr. Johnston, with all full respect, given your years of experience, having recognised the facts that I've listed, it seems there's not one single thing you think that would have an appearance of a conflict of interest for someone who has to present an independent report on the foreign interference of Beijing in our elections that would have favoured the Liberal Party. Do you sincerely think that with all of this, there is nothing that could give the appearance that there's a conflict of interest? And do you think that Canadians should just believe you on your word?
Well, Madam Chair, to answer the question, I don't believe I have a conflict of interest, and I would not have undertaken this responsibility had I had a conflict of interest. What I would say is that for 55 years, I've served on advisory committees, perhaps on 2 to 3 dozen times, because of my nonpartisanship and integrity. And this is the first time that's ever been called into question or a suggestion that I have a conflict of interest. So my suggestion, Madam Chair, is that one looks at a record of service and comes to one's conclusion about conflict of interest. And I would, again, plea that you focus the attention on foreign interference, this report, which will be reviewed, and others where we must do a much better job of getting on with the important matter.
Mr. Cooper, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, through you, Madam Chair, when you were asked earlier to reconcile the briefing that Aaron O'Toole had from CSIS, in which he was informed that he and the Conservative Party were targeted by Beijing and, among other things, the Beijing regime and Beijing actors, including the United Front Work Department, amplified and spread disinformation, versus your conclusion that you could not trace that disinformation to a state-sponsored source. You said, quote, evidence that we had before us that permitted us to come to the conclusion you've suggested what was available to us at the time, end of quote. So are you saying that you didn't have all of the material evidence and intelligence when you drafted your report?
Madam Chair, through you, when we drafted our report, we had the intelligence then available from CSIS and other sources, and that was the basis of our conclusion.
You had intelligence, but you said it was based on what was available to us at the time, and that, quote, much greater step in terms of what should have been done, close quote, was what you said in answer to your effort to try to reconcile what you said versus what Mr. O'Toole said based upon the information that he had received from a CSIS briefing. So again, I put it to you, how do you explain that?
Madam Chair, we reported on what was available to us. What transpired in the discussion between the director of CSIS and Mr. O'Toole, I don't know, but the issue of
who selected the CSIS information that you relied upon in your report?
We had significant information, Madam Chair, from CSIS, and we had information, of course, from other agencies such as the National Security Advisor and so on, and direct testimony from heads of the different agencies.
I would submit the only way to reconcile what Mr. O'Toole says versus what is in your report is one of three things. Either you omitted material information, you misinterpreted that information, or this government withheld that information from you. And I will put it to you more specifically that at page 25 of your report, you, in reference to the September 8th Global Times article that contained disinformation, the Global Times being a Beijing-controlled entity, at page 25 of your report, you state that with respect to that disinformation from the Global Times, that, quote, the recirculation could not be attributed to any state actor. How did you come to such a conclusion?
Madam Chair, we came to the conclusion set out there on the information that was available to us at that time.
Well, okay, thank you for that, because the information that was available to you at that time surely would have included a rapid response mechanism report dated October 18th, 2021, that stated, quote, Chinese Communist Party media accounts on Douyin, the Chinese version of TikTok, have published videos that repeat a Global Times headline published on September 8th that suggests the CPC's platform would lead to China to break off relations with Canada. A Communist Party media account, including one Douyin account that had 26 million followers. You had that information, so in the face of that, why did you say that the Beijing regime that there was no evidence that the Beijing regime was involved in the recirculation of that disinformation?
Madam Chair, through you, the answer to the question is our conclusion was that we could not find direct attribution to any state actor. There was no question that there were activities, but tracing it to the state actor directly was not a conclusion we could come to.
Rapid response mechanism attributed it to a state actor, a Communist Party media account. So what part of state actor doesn't equal a Communist Party media account?
Madam Chair, if I understand the reference, I'm looking at our report which speaks about WeChat of an article from the Hill Times. Is that the reference?
No, it's the Rapid Response Mechanism report of October 18th, 2021, one of the very few documents that have been produced to this committee. Surely you had seen it.
Madam Chair, with respect to that, the information that we had did not permit us to conclude that there was a state-sponsored force. There may be other information that would make that clear, but that was not clear to us at the time.
Communist Party media accounts with one account having 26 million followers, but you made the unequivocal statement that there was nothing to indicate recirculation and amplification by the Beijing regime. You further cite on page 25 of your report that in reference to the misinformation directed at then Member of Parliament Kenny Chiu, that it too could, quote, not be traced to a state-sponsored source, even though, Mr. Johnson, were you not aware that on September 10th, an account associated with HuiNet, I'm mispronouncing it, but HuiNet, which is connected to the United Front Work Department, posted disinformation from another Global Times article, this time targeted at Kenny Chiu, and yet you make that unequivocal statement in your report. How is that possible?
Madam Chair, through you, let me refer specifically to what we said on that matter on page 25. Chinese Canadian MPs, including Mr. Chiu, were and remain of particular interest to the PRC. There was online misinformation about Mr. Chiu's proposed foreign agent legislation, which he corrected in the media during the campaign. But the misinformation could not be traced to a state-sponsored source. The government does not regulate consumption of social media during elections or otherwise. However, it has engaged with social media platforms to deal with misinformation and the threat that it poses to election security. This does not include WeChat, which is based in the PRC.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Mr. Johnson, through you, Madam Chair, at page 27 of your report, you say very specifically that an issues management note was sent to the minister in May of 2021 concerning Michael Chong, but that, quote, neither the minister nor his chief of staff received that because they didn't have access to what you refer to as the top secret network email. At committee last Thursday, Minister Blair said it wasn't an issue of access. In fact, he said, quote, first of all, there is no email, end of quote. So is Mr. Blair not being forthright in his testimony, or is there a material fact or facts that you got wrong in your report? I'm trying to understand, on the one hand, what Mr. Blair said versus what you say, which I can't reconcile.
Madam Chair, the question was what Mr. Blair received. Our understanding from Mr. Blair's testimonies to us is that he did not receive the memo indicating that that warning was there.
But a memo had been sent to his attention.
My understanding is that it had his name or office on it, but he did not receive it.
And that was sent through an email, a top secret email system. That's what your report says.
Yes, Madam Chair, the understanding that I have is very clearly email or whatever, he did not receive it. That was the testimony he gave to us. And that, for us, seemed to be a very substantial flaw in how information is crystallized and finds its way into the hands of recipients who have the accountability to act on it.
Well, it's impossible to understand how Mr. Blair could say there just wasn't such an account, but you say there is. So moving on to the member for Don Valley North, you state at page 23 and 24 of your report that, quote, I did not find evidence that Mr. Dong was aware of the irregularities or the PRC consulate's potential involvement in his nomination, closed quote. Did you find any evidence or intelligence that Mr. Dong was unaware of Beijing consulate's involvement in the irregularities that happened at his nomination campaign? At the nomination meeting?
Yeah, again, I'm trying to be careful of dealing with what's open information and what's classification information. With respect to the nomination meeting, there clearly were strange practices, unusual practices going on. We did not conclude from that that was directly laid to the hands of the People's Republic. There clearly was discussion between Mr. Dong and the consulate in Toronto, but that's the extent of my understanding.
Well, I asked you a specific question, and that was whether you had any information that he was unaware, and I want to ask you very simply, why did you not bother to interview Mr. Dong? We, I think, interviewed the people who had information about these particular matters. Mr. Dong, at that time, I think, was
proceeding with his own lawsuit, and that we felt that this was something that he should get on with.
I want to ask you a question briefly about your report. I'm sure you're aware there have been multiple Beijing police stations operating at various locations across Canada for the purpose of intimidating Chinese Canadians, students from China studying here, and to silence their democratic right to debate and freely criticize foreign governments. And I was disappointed, however, to see that was not included in your report. Can you explain why?
Madam Chair, the activities of the workstations are nefarious, widespread here in Canada and here in other jurisdictions. They are the subject of RCMP investigation, which is a rather unusual situation. And because of that investigation going on and oversight activities, we felt it was appropriate to see that investigation through.
Thank you for your answer. I do feel, though, however, that it is warranted and certainly encompassed in the foreign interference sphere that has been talked about quite a bit, and I see that you're nodding in agreement, so I appreciate that. But I do feel that leaving it out does feed into a bit of the perception of bias that has been a criticism of this report and of you leading the report, in the sense that has been a failure of the Liberal government to drag its feet on bringing forward the Foreign Registry Act, Agents Registry Act, which would be the vital tool needed to hold those accountable operating these illegal Beijing police stations that are a very clear violation of our sovereignty, a slap in the face to all Canadians, and yet the tool we need to hold those accountable who are responsible for this. Again, the Liberal government has dragged its feet for a number of years. I do feel, sir, that would have been a well-placed criticism within this report, but there were very few, if any, criticisms of the current Liberal government in the report, and I found that concerning as well that you had left out the Trudeau Foundation, given the leaked report from CSIS that $140,000 had been given through various channels from the Communist Party of China to the Trudeau Foundation, which CSIS said in the leak through a wiretap was found to have been donated for the express purpose of influencing Justin Trudeau, who would ultimately become the Prime Minister. So again, not including that as well leads to perception of bias, sir, whether warranted or not. That certainly, I think, is a valid perception that many people beyond the Conservative Party have pointed out. And I do feel, sir, that, and again, I appreciate that you do not see a conflict of interest with Justin Trudeau or the Trudeau family, but I do have to point out that it is not normal or common, certainly, in Canada, that people are friends with Prime Minister's sons, that people have dinner with them, that people go skiing with them. I am a McGill graduate, sir, and I appreciate that you were also at McGill, but you mentioned several times that you ran into Justin Trudeau at McGill, that you saw him there. I can tell you, when I was at McGill, I didn't know who the president was, let alone run into him or her on multiple occasions. So I do feel that perhaps there is, because of your long career and your service to Canada, but you have very clear connections to a very elite group of what some call Liberal insiders that perhaps you don't recognize. And that has provided a very clear perception of bias with your appointment, sir. Whether rightfully or wrongfully, I do feel that perception, that those who hold them for good reason in this regard. And ultimately, sir, while the report is extensive, it does really downplay a lot of the concerns and the leaks that we have seen from reputable journalists in the Globe and Mail. It denies certain ones, it calls certain other ones false, that the conclusions were false. You are quite critical, though I do appreciate that you don't see it this way, but this report, sir, is quite critical of media and their discussion of these leaks in the news to tell the public. It is also quite critical of the Conservative Party and the way that we've held the government accountable upon learning on these leaks. And yet, again, it is not very critical at all of the Liberal Party, despite the fact that they have really not held anyone accountable for the police stations, for the intimidation of MP Chong, MP O'Toole, MP Kwan, MP Chu, for the targeting of the Conservative Party of Canada. In fact, the one diplomat expelled would not have been expelled if those leaks had not happened, and yet there is nothing critical about the lack of action to hold anyone accountable for these things in this report. So, sir, I respectfully to you and through the chair, I do feel that the perception of bias is warranted both in the report and given your history with the Trudeau family. And certainly I will just conclude, Madam Chair, that I urge you to respect the will of Parliament, Mr. Johnston, in 3 votes calling for public inquiry, and that you respect the will of Parliament in honourably stepping down following that. Thank you, Mr. Johnston.
First of all, with respect to no criticism of the government, the report goes into quite considerable detail to say we have a system of dealing with foreign interference that is not working, and point out a number of the areas of defects. Have welcomed the initiatives that have been taken, such as working to now establish a foreign agents registry, which would put that in the public realm. That's been a matter that has had to study because it's got pros and cons, but I think there's action on that. That's very encouraging. With respect to friendship and acquaintances and so on, you suggested that somehow my realm of friends is senior Liberal Party people. I've been fortunate in my life to be the president of 2 important universities in this country, involved in somewhere between 2 and 3 dozen inquiries, advisory boards, and so on. In the course of that kind of work, one is given the opportunity to meet with senior officials, be they Conservative or any other party, and that for me is simply part of my life. So to suggest that I'm part of a Liberal clique is just wrong.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Johnston, aside from Navigator, are there any other individuals or entities assisting you currently?
Madam Chair, I have received informal advice from numbers of people, including professionals, but no one has been paid for their services apart from Navigator.
Thank you. Are Don Guy, Brian Topp, or anyone else from GT and Company involved with assisting you?
Yes, those 2 individuals have provided advice to me, which was quite welcome.
Okay. Both individuals, Mr. Guy and Mr. Topp?
Yes.
And when did that start?
Well, Madam Chair, I think that started about 10 days ago, as I recall.
Thank you. Are you still receiving advice?
Yes, that is
Thank
the case,
you.
Madam Chair.
Anyone else from GT and Company that you've spoken to about foreign interference?
No, I think not, Madam Chair.
Okay. And are you paying Mr. Guy and Mr. Topp for their services and advice?
Not at all, Madam Chair, nor, Madam Chair, are we paying for any other the informal advice that I'm receiving from a number of quarters.
Thank you. At least 3 times, Mr. Johnston, you've misquoted sections of your report in response to various questions of members of all parties. It begs the question, sir, who actually wrote this report?
Well, Madam Chair, the question is I wrote the report and had considerable advice from a very competent legal team.
That includes Sheila Block?
Led by Sheila Block, Madam Chair.
And her team?
Madam Chair, yes, I've been assisted by a legal team of experts.
And did you receive drafting assistance from the PMO?
Madam Chair, no, there would be no question of the drafting assistance from the PMO. We're completely independent in our work from the PMO.
Did you receive advice from the PMO as to what should be contained in the report?
Well, Madam Chair, we had continual discussions with PMO officials as we were seeking information and trying to get different...
Thank you. Did you receive drafting assistance from the PCO?
Madam Chair, the report is something I wrote with assistance from my senior legal team. That was it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Mr. Chong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Madam Chair. Mr. Johnston, thank you for taking the time over the last 3 hours to appear in front of us. The core of your mandate, is to assess foreign interference in our electoral process. That's the core of your mandate. And in Canada, there is only one federal electoral process. And that is the process whereby Canadians get one vote for their local member of parliament. Everyone else in our system is appointed. The Senate is appointed. The Prime Minister is appointed, as you know, as a former Governor General. The Cabinet is appointed. Everyone else is appointed. The only electoral process federally in our system is for the House of Commons. It's the only part of our system that has an electoral process. It's the only part of our system that is democratic. It's the only part of our system where Canadians get a vote, and that is for the House of Commons. And the majority of the people's 338 elected representatives have voted 3 times in the last 3 months for an independent public inquiry. Yet you, with respect, and you alone have recommended against one. How can the government, of which you in this process you are involved in as independent rapporteur, how can you and the government restore trust and confidence in our democracy if the government continues to defy the democratic wishes of our only national democratic institution, the House of Commons?
Well, Madam Chair, through you, I was asked by the government of the day to undertake a job to review foreign interference, and that included the question of whether a public inquiry would be the best way to do it. After a very thoughtful consideration, we concluded that that was not, but that conducting public hearings on the matters that were not classified information would be a very appropriate way to build trust in our institutions. And that work continues to be very important, and I think we need to bring a sense of urgency to get on with that task.
Just a very, maybe a quick, very different question, Madam Chair, a very short one. Mr. O'Toole indicated that the report had been sent to translation on the weekend before he had met with you. On what date had the report been sent to translation?
If my memory serves me, for translation, but on the basis that we get the translation started and that there would be changes and amendments to that report within the 2 days following our meeting with Mr. O'Toole, which I again, as emphasized, was an extremely important and helpful meeting. We made changes to that report and ensured that they were in the translation.
Thank you. I know time is so short, and I did let you get one extra one in there, so I'll note that.
You mentioned in your remarks that there are 3 advisors for the second part of your mandate. Could you tell us who those 3 advisors are?
No, we have not begun that at all.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to focus on your second part of your mandate that you outlined in your report. You mentioned first by starting by referencing a quote on page 16 of your report. In the right-hand column halfway down in the second paragraph of that column, you say, quote, "There is no doubt that these communities are distrustful of security agencies." That's not entirely accurate. Many diaspora communities have been pleading with security agencies to do more to stop the foreign interference that they are subject to, particularly the Chinese Canadian community. Chinese Canadians are being targeted by Beijing, and they have rejected your proposals for public hearings. They're frustrated because they've already spoken up and testified over the last 4 years in front of the 4 parliamentary committees that I've referenced many times. The government has largely ignored their pleas for help, and they've suffered in silence. They're exhausted. They want more action, not these hearings that you're proposing. And I just yesterday evening looked at a partial list of members of the Chinese diaspora here who don't want this second phase of hearings, who want an independent public inquiry. Mabel Tung of the Vancouver Society in Support of Democratic Movement, Mehmet Todi of the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, Chemi Lamo of the International Tibet Network, Gloria Fung of Canada-Hong Kong Link, Victor Ho, the former editor of Singtao Daily, one of the largest Chinese language newspapers in the country, Sherry Wong of Alliance Canada-Hong Kong, and the list really does go on. All of these civic leaders in the Chinese community and many more have expressed a lack of confidence in your first report and in this process. So how can you possibly proceed with the second part of your mandate in light of that lack of confidence from many parts of the Chinese community in Canada?
Well, Madam Chair, And through you, our hope that we could encourage members of those communities to continue their work in trying to draw to the attention of Parliament and public generally of the dangers we're facing. We hope that the work that we have done, the review by NSICOP and CIRA, joined by leaders of the opposition, will provide a great deal of impetus to do much more of an active kind in providing the appropriate protection for these communities.
These communities that have been most impacted by PRC interference have been asking for an independent public inquiry. They put their hope in Parliament over the last 4 years that we would get some real action through Parliament. But unfortunately, because Parliament has been unable to do its job because of a lack of information from the government, a lack of documents, a lack of forthcoming testimony, forthrightness from government witnesses at committee, we've all in Parliament and amongst the diaspora community have now put our hopes on an independent public inquiry with the full powers of a public inquiry to subpoena witnesses, to call for the production of documents so that the government can be held accountable as to what happened and these long-standing issues can be addressed. What would you say to those who've said that an independent public inquiry can be held while at the same time protecting national security? Reference was made earlier to the fact that we've had inquiries before, like the Mayor Arar inquiry, which dealt with highly classified intelligence information. In fact, some of that information was Five Eyes intelligence. That is the most sensitive intelligence because it comes from our Five Eyes partners and not from domestic intelligence agencies. We've also had the former head of CSIS, Dick Fadden, say that a public inquiry is possible on this matter, and we've had Dan Stanton, a former CSIS officer and manager, also say that a public inquiry is possible. We've had the former Chief Electoral Officer of Canada say that a public inquiry is necessary. So in light of all these calls for a public inquiry, how can your second part of your mandate restore confidence in light of all these calls?
Madam Chair, through you, I would say there are other experts, including Ward Alcock, for example, who have suggested public inquiries are not the appropriate way, and Justice O'Connor, following the Arar Committee, made the same point. So there are differences of opinion on that, and those are reasonable. What I believe is that the work of our group, the Special Rapporteur, in fact, will provide a great deal of pressure and impetus on the government to act with greater acceleration on improving our system of dealing with foreign interference, and that the work that we will do over the next 5 months will add very considerable effort to that, so that I'm quite hopeful that we will see some very considerable action over the course of the next few months on this very important challenge.
Thank you.